Ian from RTO here. Welcome to another Battle of the Debuts, where we take the two debut albums of two artists, look at them and see which one was the better, or made a better impact is a better way of saying it, isn't it? So today we're going to go way back. We're going to do to the pioneering days of rock and roll, and two of the most influential people in rock and roll. They both played the piano as well. That's Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis. Sadly no longer with us, but what they left for us was just incredible. So as usual, we do the first album that came out first, and in this case it is a certain Richard Wayne Penniman, known to us better as Little Richard. Now, Little Richard was born on December the 5th, 1932, and sadly passed away on May the 9th, 2020. Singer, songwriter, definitely an influential figure in popular music and culture for 7 decades. Pretty awesome, and he has all been described as one of the architects of rock and roll, especially in the mid-50s, when he had that charismatic showmanship, dynamite music, frenetic piano playing, and that raspy vocal he had, which laid the foundations for rock and roll. So his debut album was called Here's Little Richard, and it was released on the 4th of March 1957, promoted as 6 Little Richard hits and 6 brand new songs. So playing on this we have got Little Richard piano and vocals, Lee Allen tenor sax, Alvin Red Tyler on the baritone saxophone, Frank Fields on the bass, Earl Palmer on drums, and Edgar Blanchard on guitars. So, opens up with an absolute classic from Little Richard, Tutti Frutti. Great, this song, one of the great rock and roll songs of all time. What a powerful voice, some great piano playing on it as well, brilliant stuff. Then we got True Fine Mama, which is actually written by Little Richard himself. It's just got that killer piano on it. Both him and Jerry, their piano was the prominent thing. Absolutely brilliant little track. Just solid rock and roll. Can't Believe You Want to Leave, Fats Domino song. Loves this. I love the boom 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 sort of thing. Great little track, like that one. Then we get Ready Teddy. The vocal from Little Richard on this is absolutely ferocious, graspy, absolutely killer track. Then we get Baby. Love this. Good old fashioned saxophone in bluesy rock and roll. Can't go wrong really, can you? Then we get Slippin and Slidin. Another classic. At the time this was like a brand new sort of song, but you know, when the album come out, and it's a great rock and roll song. Then we get one of my favourite songs by Little Richard, Long Tall Sally. What can you say about this? His vocals, his shrieking, it's just absolutely on fire. What a great track. Then we get Miss Anne. This is more of a shuffle rock and roll track. Powerful vocal from Little Richard as ever, but it's got that drum shuffle which is pretty good. Then we get a track called Oh Why. More shuffling rock and roll. Bit of a boogie on this one. Good stuff. Rip It Up, another classic. Absolutely belter track. Jenny Jenny, another great vocal, shrieking away, holding the notes. Little Richard at his best. And the last track on this is called She's Got It. I love the saxophone on this. It's just great rock and roll. What do I think of this album? Well, I think this is one of the quintessential rock and roll albums. A lot of big people at the time, of course, Elvis, Bill Haley and the Comets, Big Bopper, Richie Valens, Buddy Holly. They were all around at the same time, but this is one of the quintessentials rock and roll albums. Everyone loves Little Richard if you're into rock and roll. And it is one of my favourite rock and roll albums of all time. So there's reviewing this. There's not much about it, but there are one little bits. Billboard praised the striking cover art and commented that Richards for an antic up-tempo wailings will definitely be greeted enthusiastically by the jive set. Cashbox described the album as a refresher course of previous rock and roll smashes, nothing but hardly with a spare breath. The young entertainer belts out some of his biggest hits. Then we had one person say, came from the Canon Record, whose reviewer commented, didn't say who he was. The full treatment did not altogether convince me that rock and roll is my salvation. Oh dear. Someone that probably ate his words. Obviously against rock and roll. I won't say any much more, but Mark Denning of All Music commented that these 12 tunes may not represent the alpha omega of Little Richard's best music, but every song is a classic, and like many of his peers, time has refused to render the first quaint, grainy scream of Little Richard. So there we go. So let's have a look at what the ratings are. All Music have given it a 4 stars. The Encyclopedia of Popular Music 5 stars. Music Story 4.5. Record Collector 4. The Rolling Stone Album Guide 4. Sputnik Music 4.5. How did it do in the charts? Well, I don't think it charted over here, but it got to number 13 on the Billboard Pop Albums of 1957. Not bad. So let's have a look at the nuts and bolts of this one. Song quality, as I said, lots of classics on here. If you don't know these tracks and you're into rock and roll, there's something not quite right, is there? So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. Production, we got to remember this is 1957. You're not going to get brilliant production, but for the time it was very, very good. So I'm going to give it 3 out of 5. Reception went down well back in 1957, and it's still a popular album now, because it's basically the greatest hits album. You know, for your first album full of greatest hits, it's just pretty cool. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. Cover design, as one of the commentators said, it's a striking cover, which it is. Very bold. This is me, Little Richard. So it gets a 4 out of 5. So for Here's Little Richard, by Little Richard, gives us a grand total of 15 out of 20. So let's move on to our next contender. Now this again is one of the pioneers, Mr. Jerry Lee Lewis, born on the 29th of September 1935. Sadly passed away last year in October. Nicknamed the Killer, and also the first real wild man of rock and roll. Now his style was more country rock and roll than country roots than Little Richard's just pure rock and roll. His career went on the falter though when he married his cousin of 13-year-old. It was once removed, but that was in the States. There were different laws where it was acceptable, somewhere it is another, and you know, it's all part of the history. So, and he was, of course, worked with some of his recordings at Sun Records in Memphis, Tennessee. So the first album, his debut album, was just called Jerry Lee Lewis, and it was released on Sun Records in 1958. First track on here is a cover written by Otis Blackwell. Elvis done this as well. It's Don't Be Cruel. Good little rock and roll number. A great vocal from Jerry as ever. Goodnight Irene's the next one. This is a country song that he sort of rock and rolled up a little bit. It's a fine vocal from Jerry, and I love his piano style, the dumba 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 dumba, that rolling piano, which is absolutely brilliant. Then we have a track called Put Me Down. Great piano here from Jerry, great vocal, terrific stuff. Then we have a track called It All Depends. Again, you can see the country roots of Jerry in this, but it's still rock and roll, absolutely great. Then we have the Ubangi Stomp. Of all the tracks on here, you know, remember this is recorded in 58. It's a little bit flat, and it doesn't give you the excitement. It's a shame because it's quite a nice tune. Crazy Arms, one of my favourite tracks by Jerry Lee Lewis. I love this song. It's a nice sort of rock and roll ballad type thing. It's one of Jerry's best vocals for me. And then he does a version of Jambalaya, which is a Hank Williams thing. It's a good song, but I don't like this version. I really don't. It's probably the little blip on the album for me. Fools Like Me. Again, this is more of a country song than a rock and roll song, but it's an okay song. Jerry gives a fine performance. Then my favourite ever song by Jerry Lee Lewis, High School Confidential. Absolutely brilliant track. Love this. Quintessential rock and roll track for me. And then he does a version of When the Saints Go Marching In. Yes. Now, When the Saints Go Marching In, yeah, I've sang it a few times because it's my local rugby team's called Northampton Saints, and we do sing it quite well, but to be honest, I don't like it on here at all. Then we get another cover. It's Matchbox by Cole Perkins, of course. A very good version of it. Nothing wrong, it's just a great song, and Jerry does a great version. And then we get another one, a song that everybody's copied at some stage. It'll Be Me. Even Deep Purple have covered this. I know Cliff has, but this is my favourite version of it. It's a great song. Okay, a really good album. I'm a real big fan of Jerry Lee Lewis, and there's some classics on here as well. It's another one of those rock and roll albums that I think are very important. So again, there's not much written about this album, but what I have found is this, that Coda described the selections found on Jerry Lee Lewis as a curious mixture with a great deal of the best material being left off, but the album still having a terrific debut. There's not much written about this at all. Didn't chart. So we'll have a look at the nuts and bolts of this one. Song quality. Again, really good songs on here. Some really good covers. as well. Even the country sounding ones are okay. You know, it's a different brand of rock and roll. I still like this album, so I'll give this a 4 out of 5. Production, again, I think it's 1958. You know, they're all good songs, except that in one of them that is a bit flat. But I'll still give it a 3 out of 5. Reception, didn't do as well as Little Richard, which is a shame. There's no one's put any marks on it or anything, but listening to it, and I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Cover design, again, excellent cover, showing who it is, Jerry Lee Lewis. So I'm going to give that 4. So for Jerry Lee Lewis, by Jerry Lee Lewis, gives us a grand total of 14 out of 20. So technically a win for Little Richard. These are 2 great rock and roll albums, without a doubt. 2 of the pioneers of rock and roll music. In different sort of styles. You had the ferocious Little Richard rock and roll, and then you had Jerry Lee Lewis with his country style rock and roll. All really good stuff. But what one do I prefer? Oh dear, it is tough because I do love both of these artists. But when it comes down to it, for ball breaking, solid rock and roll, screaming, frenetic playing, it's got to be Little Richard for me. He was ferocious, and so today the winner is going to be Little Richard for me. As much as I love Jerry, Little Richard was just that little bit more stage presence, I think. When you see old clips of Little Richard, you can see where people like Keith Emerson got their antics from, because it's absolutely terrific stuff. Okay, but you may disagree with me. Like quite a few times you do. So you know the drill now. You got used to this. In the community you can do the poll. There'll be a thing up in live stream tonight, or just put your comments, and after you've watched it, whatever social media you watch it on. Okay, that's all for this week. Just a quick spoiler attack. In March we're doing one of the little themes ones, like we did. Remember, we did the Battle of the Debuts, I've Gone Solo. So this next one we're doing in March will be called, it'll be a Battle of the Debuts, the best sellers. So it's the 2 bands with their best selling albums of all time going head to head, just to mix it up a little bit. Okay, coming up next is the Pick and Mix, and this week it's mixing it up, which means we're looking at a record producer. Now this is one of the most controversial record producers, but he's been asked, someone asked for it, so we're going to do it. And we can't not do anything on producers without mentioning Phil Spector. Okay, towards the end of his life he got himself into a spot of bother, put it plainly, but the music he put out in the 60s, he was the sound of the 60s. So I'll be having a look at the career of Phil Spector. So join me for that one, and bye for now.